At the end of 2016, Camille was released in League of Legends, marking a significant addition to the game. With a powerful in-game kit, Camille quickly became one of Riot's more successful creations. Not only does she remain a compelling champion who frequently appears in solo queue to this day, but she also boasts a rich and intriguing lore. Although Camille might not reach the epic level of characters like Mordekaiser, she is undoubtedly better developed than many others, such as Seraphine, who lacks the same depth and complexity. Camille's story is rooted in the rich lore of Piltover. She is a prominent member of the Pharaohs clan, one of the most influential families in Piltover, which has a significant grip on the hextech trade. This includes both the type of hextech derived from the souls of Brackern, the race of Skarner, and the artificial kind that was pioneered by the Pharaohs family themselves. Camille's skills were so advanced that they were almost envied by everyone around her. Yet her brother struggled with severe health issues. Due to his frailty, Camille assumed the role that was originally intended for him, leader of the Pharaohs clan's intelligence division. Tragedy struck when their father was assassinated, and their mother soon died of grief, further solidifying Camille's position within the family. Despite her brother becoming the clan leader, it was Camille who should have naturally assumed that role. Nevertheless, she accepted her position and began devising elaborate plans to modify her body using hextech. To carry out these modifications, they hired a man named Håkon. Over time, Håkon fell deeply in love with Camille, leading to a passionate love affair. However, as Camille began replacing more and more of her body parts with robotic components, she started losing her emotions, a fate similar to that of Oriana.
I know what makes them tick. I know how to make the ticking stop.
Camille found herself at a crossroads, torn between her loyalty to her family, which would require her to replace her heart, and her love for Håkon. Under the manipulative influence of her brother, Camille ultimately chose to remove her heart and abandon her love, a decision that would seal her fate. From that point on, she became more machine than human, progressively replacing more parts of her body, including her legs, which were swapped out for scissor-like blades, among other modifications. In the end, Camille killed her brother and assumed his position as the leader of intelligence, while also taking on various other responsibilities within the clan. One significant consequence of these extensive body enhancements is that Camille has become nearly immortal, given the sheer number of modifications she has undergone. This raises the question of how much of her humanity remains intact. Her lore is intricately woven and well-constructed, but the question arises, why doesn't Camille exist in the current state of the game anymore? Before delving into this issue, there are some essential background details to consider. But before we dive deeper, if you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you really want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. There are some pretty cool perks available, like the option to choose the theme of a future video. Now, with that said, let's get back to the topic. Runeterra's lore was, until recently, in complete disarray. For instance, during the Ruined King event, different stories emerged, each providing its own version of how the events unfolded. We had the game, the events that transpired in League of Legends, and the animation, each presenting different interpretations. Furthermore, the writing of this event led to the misrepresentation of several characters' personalities, which only added to the confusion. Riot Games made an attempt to address this chaos by using Echo's game as a means to explain the discrepancies in the lore. The game is set in Zaun, where Echo strives to prevent a catastrophe that his future self has warned him about. Throughout the game, Echo encounters important characters, including his family and enemies like Jinx, in an effort to explain the inconsistencies and varying narratives surrounding the same events in the universe. The post-credits scene of the game suggests that each of Riot's works takes place in a different world within the multiverse. This is illustrated by the appearance of the Arcane universe, followed by the Project Skins universe, and finally Echo's game. Consequently, the lore of Legends of Runeterra was said to exist in one world, League of Legends in another, Riot Forge games in yet another, and so on. This situation is quite frustrating because it would mean that players constantly need to figure out which world a particular story is set in, and it almost entirely diminishes the weight of the events in the lore. After all, if a champion dies in an event from one game, they would still be alive in other games as if nothing had happened, rendering the stories meaningless because nothing really matters. However, Riot recognized this problem and, likely with a focus on the upcoming MMO, aimed to make the storytelling more cohesive and engaging for players. To make the various games set in Runeterra more interconnected, Riot announced in the dev update of October 2023 that the lore would now have a single canon, and that canon would encompass everything. Everything that exists in Runeterra is now considered valid and takes place within the same universe. While this approach might sound comprehensive, it introduces several issues, particularly because there are different pieces of content that contradict each other, leading to numerous narrative gaps. To guide this new canon, Riot seems to be relying on the animations, such as Arcane, as well as much of Legends of Runeterra. But making everything consistent with this new canon isn't something that can be done overnight. What doesn't currently fit into the canon will be gradually revised with the release of new stories and reworks, such as Skarners, for example. For those unfamiliar, the new Skarner is portrayed as an ancient creature from Ixtal, serving as a ruler there, and he no longer has any connection to Hextech, much less to Shurima. And if you've watched Arcane, you're well aware that Victor and Jace were the ones who created Hextech, and it happened very recently in Runeterra's history. These two stories complement each other, which makes sense. Skarner has nothing to do with Hextech, as it was created by Victor and Jace in a laboratory, and Skarner didn't just come into existence ready-made. This brings us to the crux of the problem. If Arcane and the new Skarner lore are canon and consistent with each other, where does Camille fit into this story? It's no longer plausible for her to be 80 years old and to have been extensively modified by Hextech for a long time, given that Hextech is a relatively recent development. It also doesn't make sense for her to be exploiting Hextech derived from the souls of stone scorpions from Shurima, because none of that aligns with the new narrative, thereby rendering her entire lore invalid. As a result, Camille no longer has a place in the world of Runeterra because the lore spaces she once occupied no longer exist. It's clear that Riot will eventually rework her lore, but the point here is to highlight that technically, we no longer know exactly what is or isn't canon, except for Arcane and the Riot Forge games, especially those released from Song of Nunu onward. Because of this uncertainty, everything could potentially change. Camille isn't the only example. There are numerous other characters who have been affected to varying degrees. One example is Convergence, the Echo game mentioned earlier. If the Riot Forge games are canon, then by extension Convergence is also canon, which means the multiverse concept is still in play, and thus nothing has truly changed, and the canon remains ambiguous. Convergence represents a significant challenge for Riot in terms of lore continuity. Even if we set aside the multiverse aspect, the game still presents considerable problems, such as Echo having parents in Convergence, while in Arcane, he is portrayed as an orphan. Additionally, the presence of future Echo adds another layer of complexity to the narrative. Although this entire situation appears problematic, there is a potential solution to exclude Convergence from the canon while maintaining the multiverse, but not in the manner Riot previously presented it. Riot needs to keep the standard Runeterra lore within a single universe while acknowledging the existence of alternate skin universes, like Project, which will be featured in an upcoming video on the channel. If these parallel universes exist, there's nothing to prevent Convergence from being part of one of these universes, which would resolve some issues, but it would also set a dangerous precedent. Riot could potentially compromise the lore again and use the multiverse as an excuse. In my opinion, this is a critical moment in League of Legends history. Depending on how Riot handles this situation, we could either enter a golden age for the universe or descend into chaos, despair, and frustration. But that's just my take. If you disagree, well, that's just tough luck. Just kidding. Leave your thoughts in the comments so we can have a healthy discussion. Take care and see you next time.